For the last few weeks, we've been talking about our vibes and emotions and how if we aren't careful, they can take control of us. And since none of us like being controlled, handling our emotions is something that we want to get better at. As we continue this conversation today, I want to ask you a question. Are you ready? What would you do if you knew you would never get caught and that there would never be any consequences? Now, go and post what you just thought of on your Snap or your Insta. I'm just joking. I'm not going to expose you like that. But the truth is, we all have the potential to think some wild thoughts. The real problem is taking care of what's inside. Because good or bad, whatever's inside is coming out of us. And let's be honest with ourselves. We can all admit that we have some problems on the inside, right? Most of us can quickly think of things that we've done, said, or thought that no one else is allowed to know about. And when this stuff comes out of us and we do or say something that's not great, the result is usually a different emotion that can end up controlling us. Right now, I'm talking about this feeling called guilt. Guilt is a loaded word because there's a lot of different kinds of guilt. One is false guilt, that guilt you feel when you aren't guilty. Maybe you feel bad about something you didn't do or feel bad about something that wasn't a big deal. Then there's actual guilt. And this is what we're talking about today. This is the kind of guilt that you feel when you did something you shouldn't have done, or you said something you shouldn't have said. It's when you hurt someone who deserved to be treated better. Feeling this legitimate guilt isn't a bad thing. And it becomes a problem when you've done it in the past and it's become part of your identity. See, when you don't deal with guilt, it grows and evolves into anger. Anger at ourselves, anger for behaving a certain way, anger at not being able to move on from the past. And the thing about anger is it doesn't stay inside of us. It eventually comes out. The truth is, we're all guilty of something. So we are all also in danger of letting our guilt become anger, and our anger turning us into being defensive. We don't like people pointing out where we may have gotten it wrong, and there's a reason for that. If we own up to our guilt and admit what we did wasn't okay, we'll see what we did for what it was, a sin. And that leaves us feeling condemned, convicted, and judged. In other words, we feel bad because we'll see that we did something bad and we can't undo it. We can't unsay that thing, we can't untalk that way or untreat someone that way. Eventually we realize that even though this thing is in the past, it's not completely gone. And it's still there to be a part of our story. But here's the good news. You don't have to be defined by your past, and you don't have to deny it either. Jesus offers a different way, a way to no longer be controlled by our guilt, shame, or our anger. And that's what we're gonna be talking about for the next few minutes. Here's a couple things that I want you to realize. First, you're no longer allowed to condemn yourself or punish yourself. Guilt is not the boss of you. You belong to God, and God says that you are not condemned. So when that voice of shame and guilt tries to weigh you down, you can say, Jesus took care of that for me. That's not who I am anymore. I belong to Jesus. The second thing is your guilt will remind you, but it will not define you, meaning that what you did doesn't disappear. You may have some lessons to learn, but that thing you did, the thing you said, it isn't who you are. And here, check this out. The third thing, you don't get to condemn others for their mistakes. When you realize that someone did something wrong, you don't get to judge. You don't get to hate on them. And the fourth thing, you are free to make things right with the person you hurt without excuses or expectation of getting something back from them. This is big. Sometimes we think that when we do something wrong, the most important thing for us to do is to just pray and ask God for forgiveness and everything will be all better. But it's not always fine. Jesus cares about you making it right, not just with him, but with the person you hurt. So go ahead and pray for forgiveness, but then go out and make it right with the other person. Whatever you took from them, trust, friendship, self-esteem, own it. I want to look at something from the Apostle Paul, and it's important that we know who said this because Paul had more regret and guilt than all of us combined. He wasn't a preacher trying to make a point. He lived it. He was ashamed of his past and felt guilty. Because of the early part of his life, before he became known as Paul, he was known as Saul of Tarsus. And Saul spent his time hunting down the followers of Jesus so that he could arrest them and have them tortured, imprisoned, and even killed. He did more than just let this happen. He made it happen. Instead, he told his story and owned it. And he wrote about it in a letter to Christians living in Rome, saying this. All of this meaning Jesus had no guilt. He did nothing wrong. He came and lived a perfect life, and he died a criminal's death so that we can be free. We have every reason to feel guilty. Jesus had none, and yet Jesus is the one who died. And because of that, we no longer have to feel guilty. Think of it this way. We can live a guilt-free life because Jesus took it all. He's saying, I don't see you that way anymore. And I don't want you to see yourself that way either. I want you to see yourself the way I do. You are guilty because you did something you shouldn't have. We all have done that. But you are not condemned. And that guilt doesn't have to define you anymore. What Jesus did on the cross defines you. Jesus took that guilt upon himself, and now you are free. I get it, that's scary, but remember, as long as we hold on to the guilt, we're letting our past define us. And Jesus came to change that. Our past can remind us, but it will not define us. Maybe today is the day that changes. Maybe today is the day you really understand that because of Jesus and what he did for you, you no longer have to be guilty. You no longer have to feel guilty. You no longer need to hold on to that shame, embarrassment, and pride. Because of Jesus, all of that is gone.